Now, Simon from Weaponized News has got an important update on China and Africa. Wow, what a turnout there was, Simon, in the every African leader, every one, was at the China conference. That is really something. Tell us.
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. And this is indeed why you and I obviously try and give your audience the heads up on events in advance, not just telling them what happened days later. And I'm most grateful to you for the opportunity in helping to do that. So in particular, with the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which occurred in the last week, finished on Friday, we had several conference documents that were published at the end, the main two of which were the summit declaration and then the action plan for the implementation of the summit declaration. I appreciate those may be somewhat dry and technical, but despite being immensely long, I did have the opportunity to read all of the documents, in some cases more than once. And three things that really stand out that unfortunately, with other journalists with less time or less inclination to delve into the hundreds of paragraphs of translated Mandarin, didn't actually notice was the entire of Africa not only acknowledged or expressed appreciation or nodded their hat to the Chinese Global Security Initiative, which includes not only military aspects, but also anti-terrorism, food security, energy security, cyber security, negotiations on the use of AI, nuclear security, all of those definitions of security in its broadest term. But they have actually agreed as a continent to implement it over the next 3 years. Now, that does include military officer exchanges, joint exercises, technology transfers, and so forth. So that's a huge setback to the United States, otherwise known as the hegemon. But two other issues that once again might seem obscure, but in terms of the value and the use of the US dollar, and indeed the price of goods in Europe, are very, very important. And those were not just the proposal, but the agreement to establish a interbank payment system. So like if somebody was sending the money from NatWest London to Bank National Paribas in Paris, for example, that wouldn't be done using the US dollar, but starting from scratch, much like SWIFT did with only 15 banks in the 1970s and grew to now 11,000 financial organizations. The Chinese are going to help set up both the technology and the staffing of a system such as that, but it won't be denominated in US dollars. It will be denominated for the whole of Africa for interbank payments between countries in the Chinese yuan. So a huge step towards de-dollarization, which obviously prevents the US State Department and the US Treasury from either seizing African countries' US dollar accounts in New York or indeed putting effective sanctions even on individual businesses. So very significant indeed for the whole continent. The next one, and the final one, I'll leave you with this thought, is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, otherwise known as CBAM, which is going to start being implemented in Europe just next year, so in only a few months' time. And the idea behind that is that if goods are made more cheaply in lesser developed nations, not just because of lower wages, but because they might use electricity made from the burning of coal or gas, as opposed to expensive solar power or nuclear in Europe. The idea is for those countries not to have what's called by economists a competitive advantage, namely on the final product price, but for everything to be equalized in terms of its environmental impact, such that substantial tariffs will be put on goods being sent from Asia and Africa to Europe. And that's the only way the European Union thinks that they can survive net zero, because otherwise everyone who works in a factory, both in Britain and in the European Union, will be out of a job because they've made their energy sources so incredibly expensive. And so it has been agreed between China and almost every country in Africa that they will push back on what they call environmental discrimination to the disadvantage of the global South, and use every legal avenue they have available in organizations like the World Trade Organization that is currently being sabotaged by America, because they don't like it when countries find a loophole in the rules-based international order.
Well, there you go. Amen to all of that. Simon from Weaponized News, another roundup. There used to be an advert when I was young. The car in front is a Toyota. The country in front is China.